Welcome to another episode of the Hat Collecting Talk Show, the show where we talk about the many different metaphorical hats that people wear in their lives, because no one does just one thing and everyone has a story. And here on this show, you get to hear those stories. I am your host, Lacey Artemis, a creative Jill of many hats, and I am joined today by Po Karim, who is an event and creative producer, a product designer, a musician, a writer, and more. Po's pronouns are he and him. Welcome to the show, Po.
Thank you very much for having me, Lacey.
No problem. And we are back. I had a bit of a hiatus with the show, but I'm excited and happy to be back with you guys, with my audience. So, and actually, I'm just going to roll into it. I'll talk about that thing later. The question that we kind of get started off with here is a nice little icebreaker. I like to ask my guests, where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a small town called Thorold, Ontario. And that's where I like to say I did most of my growing up. And Thorold is between Niagara Falls and St. Catharines. But I guess the whole story is I was born in Bangladesh, where my parents are from and where obviously I'm from. They emigrated when I was about 10 months old, so just like a wee baby. We emigrated first to Michigan, where my father finished his degree. And then we came to Canada. We were in Brampton for a short while. We were then in St. Catharines for a short while. And then we were in Thorold for the most of my childhood, from the ages of about 6 until I went off to university. So I think of Thorold as my hometown. But when I was young, we did move around quite a bit.
And as a bit of a kind of a sub question there, for guests who didn't grow up here in Toronto, or like kind of one of the direct surrounding suburbs, I've been asking kind of, and so you're kind of a bit of a more small town experience growing up. Do you think that has had any kind of lasting influence on you to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people from small towns will attest to this as well. But small town, there's a lot of conversation about what the nature of Canada is as a country and as a nation. And it's interesting to me how a lot of those viewpoints can be heavily biased depending on whether or not the holder of those viewpoints are from one of the major cities, of which there are like 5, or and how the small town sort of realities or viewpoints completely get erased. Because the center of media, the center of most culture in Canada are all based in either Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver. Every now and then you might get something out of Edmonton or Calgary, and then there's the East Coast, which is just an amalgam of people. I think they just assume everyone in the East Coast wears kilts and bagpipes and has kitchen parties. So I think the East Coast sort of stands in for it's like the small town of Canada is like the East Coast, right? But definitely small town Ontario is its own unique lifestyle. Depends on which small town you're from. And just to generalize over and over again, it's like if you, to overgeneralize, it's like small town Ontario is a different place. Like people are definitely, they're more friendly, but they're more racist. So there's two sides of a coin there. But they're not like outwardly racist. They just kind of hold racist viewpoints. And it's like kind of like no fault of their own. They just maybe have not been exposed to more progressive views, or it's not the prevailing attitude. But it's not to say that small town people are racist, but there's more racism. Or overt racism in a small town, or you're more likely to catch somebody saying something that's inappropriate or ignorant. Whereas in a big city, that racism is definitely more cloaked and it's more systemic, where people aren't necessarily, they consider themselves more educated or too educated to be racist, but they still benefit from racist systems and don't really vote in order to erase those racist systems. So I think small town Ontario is more upfront.
Very cool. Thank you for that answer. And so speaking of kind of different places, this is the perfect time that we take the moment to do a land acknowledgement. Toronto, or Takaronto, is located on the traditional unceded territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Anishinaabe. This is a dish with one spoon treaty territory, and we are uninvited visitors on this land. To learn more about that, you can visit native-land.ca, which covers the entire world and not just Canada, despite being a .ca website. So I do encourage people to go and check that out. If you're not from Toronto or wherever you are, really, go and take a look there and see what you can learn. And yeah, I didn't. Is there anything you would like to kind of say about that, or?
Honestly, as an immigrant to Canada, I can say that I cherish and value the country that I was brought up in, and everything that it's afforded my family in terms of privileges. But and with deep gratitude and indebtedness to the Indigenous peoples that were here before any of us. Without reservation, we owe them everything for the land that we're on.
Yes, well said. And so with that said, we're going to get into the show proper now. And so this is kind of where I said in the intro a few of the things that you do or that you're known for. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into those things that you do?
Sure. So I think the primary aspect of my identity, or in terms of the hats that I wear, is as a musician or a maker of music, and it really started from a young age. So music is a big part of my life. I also studied music in university. I went to school for jazz performance on the drum set. So I did my degree in fine arts with a focus on jazz performance. And yeah, otherwise, that I think that forms the core of like the root of a lot of my passions is music, but essentially creative arts and making something that's compelling and that touches people on an emotional level. And then I am now my profession is I guess a producer in experiential marketing, which is a nebulous term at best, but it basically means that I make things happen. So if there's a creative concept that's been thought of by a creative team, usually agencies have creative teams, they're trying to solve a business problem for a client, and they're trying to determine the best way or the best experience that will elicit a response from the audience in order to drive the business results of the client. I'm the one who brings it to life in the field. And that necessitates a lot of problem-solving ability and just a lot of foundational on-the-ground knowledge of what is and isn't possible, and knowing full well you have to come at it with the perspective that everything is possible as long as you have the correct budget and the correct timelines. And if you have enough time and you have enough money, I can basically make anything happen. And I've definitely made a lot of things happen without enough money and definitely without enough time. But that's basically my job, is to take something that's a plan and to make it a reality. And as of late, I've actually been fortunate enough to be more focused on the ideation process. So not just on the executional side, but actually be in the room to come up with the ideas that help address these business issues for clients. But it's great because that's sort of the creative part of my brain that I really love, where I'm able to just throw out far-fetched ideas and really just imagine possibilities, scenarios, regardless of whether or not they're feasible or unfeasible. It's just the pure imagination aspect, which is something I'd always wished would be a part of my professional career. And it's getting to the point where that is more and more the case. So that's really great.
The sort of sub question to this part, because I said a lot of that was linked together. I like to ask about like the biggest misconception. Are there any common misconceptions about what you do, and like how can you maybe address those or dispel them?
Yeah, honestly, it's less about misconceptions and more about like people just having a conception about what I do. Like me trying to explain what I do to my parents, for instance, is just a fool's errand. And I just have given up. They're like, I'm just assure them that I'm gainfully employed and that it's stable income, and they're okay with it. And they don't really, if you ask them what I do, they wouldn't be able to tell you. And honestly, day to day, if you ask me what I do in a nutshell, it's really hard to explain it as well. But the root of it, or the nuts and bolts, is that I work in advertising. And in that field, specifically marketing, which is more about communicating to consumers or to an audience directly. I hate the word consumers, and I hate reducing people to being consumers, but it is an industry term in terms of people that you're trying to reach. But sorry, where was I going with this? So communicating specifically to people, and experiential marketing is the field of the business where instead of them just passively accepting a message, let's say it appears on TV, or it's like it's on a billboard, or they read, it's on a newspaper or a magazine. It's a form of advertising that creates an active or requires an active response from the person or from the audience. So the most basic part of this is where you would get a sample of something. So if you're ever in a Costco and people are giving out samples of food, for instance, that's what they would call experiential marketing, because the consumer or the audience is actually has to experience the product. They have to take it into their mouth, they have to taste it and chew it, and they actually get to experience what the product is like. It's basically the trade-off is that you reach less people. Your ability to reach people is limited by the number of samples or product that you have, or the number of people that are actually in your physical space. But the experience everybody's getting is far more valuable. So if you reach people with an experience, then their connection to your message and what you're communicating is far stronger.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for all that information. It's quite it's kind of a new world. Like, I mean, I had obviously, I've been to stores where they have the samples, or I've been to events where they might have like a pop-up something or other. And so it's kind of interesting to hear about more of the things that are connected to that and kind of the why. So thank you. I hope that some of my audience just learned something along with me. So yeah, the next question here, we kind of take it all the way back. And I like to ask, when you were a child, do you remember what you wanted to be or to do when you grew up?
Yeah, and I remember it being very unfocused, but I can remember like the earliest thing I really wanted to be was a stand-up comedian. And that really, the look of shock and horror on my dad's face when I would mention this was unparalleled. I wish I could have taken a photo because he was not into it. But I was really into comedy and really admired stand-up comedians when I was like a young child, and so I kind of wanted to do that. But I was also really into like science and technology. So I remember for a while there, I was like, I really wanted to be a laser technologist, having no idea what those words meant, other than I really liked lasers and I thought technology was cool. I didn't know what technology was. So there was that part of it. And then by the time I was like 12, I think I just wanted to be a rock star. And those are like the three main things that I wanted to be growing up.
So you had your hat trick nice and early on there.
Yes, exactly.
So this is something I need to normalize this term more, because it's a great little term. Hat trick is a term from hockey for anyone who doesn't know. It's what they call it when a player scores 3 goals in the same game. And so I kind of like the hat trick idea, because it usually on this show, a lot of times I end up pairing the guests' kind of hats in threes. So I got to start saying that more so people get familiar with the term. So you had your hat trick nice and early.
Yeah. And things definitely evolved though, as I got older. Like I remember even going to university, I was still very unsure about what I wanted to do. There was obviously I wanted to study music, but at one point I was like, should I go into radio broadcasting? It was something that I kind of hobbied with when I was younger. I actually had a radio show at Brock University when I was 16 until I was 18. And it was a weekly program. I was really proud of it. And I wanted to perhaps make that a career. And then getting into creative writing as well was also something that I was sort of exploring. But I ended up getting to school for music, and I just stuck with that for the time that I was in school.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of school, in sort of an indirect way, so this show partly hinges around this idea, this cultural kind of narrative that by the time we turn 30, we're supposed to have our lives pretty much figured out and be kind of on the path that we're going to be on until we retire. But increasingly so, this is not the case for a lot of people. And so I kind of used to ask, like, where were you at the age of 30? But now I'm finding it more interesting to ask, at what age were you when you found like if you're currently on a path that you're happy with and you plan to continue with for a while, what age were you at when you kind of first got onto that path?
I would say it was really at age 29, so just under the 30 mark. But that's when I had my first I dipped my toes in the world of experiential marketing, where I was a brand ambassador for a North America wide tour, and that was the first sort of job that I had that brought out the same sort of passion and drew upon the innate skills that I had developed as a musician and a performer. And it just seemed to really speak to all my strengths. And when I discovered this field or this industry, and I took to it like a fish in water, and I was like, okay, this is kind of like the industry that I could pursue. Like obviously, a rock stardom didn't quite work out for me, and it's precarious at best. So being a professional musician, whether or not you're a star or not a star, being a musician is it's something that takes a lot of dedication, and it's very uncertain, right? It's not very predictable. So discovering the world of experiential marketing, it spoke to all my strengths. It really brought out the best in me, and it was a viable career option where there was companies I could work for and get full-time jobs with benefits and build a career. And that was really what. And I discovered that in the summer of age 29. So that's where it hit home that this would be my career path.
All right. And so the sub question to this one is there any particular obstacle or hurdle that was or what was the biggest obstacle to kind of you getting to that path sooner, perhaps?
A lot. Well, it was this other passion of mine, this dream of being a professional musician, and really sort of knowing when to quote unquote hang up the skates, right? It's like if you're a hockey player and you don't make it to the NHL, there's one point where you have to say, I need to stop skating every day. And it's not that you need to stop skating every day, but like I needed a job, and I was through my 20s, I was dedicated to learning how to play the drums as best as I possibly could. And I got pretty far as a journey of self-discovery and of self-knowledge and of discovering an art and exploring an art. I crushed it in my 20s. I was an extremely, extremely good drummer. I could say that at age 27, 28, I was the best drummer that I could be. And if I had the means, then yes, I would have kept doing that, where I was practicing 8 to 10 hours a day. I was working part-time as a server, and I was making enough to sort of, make my rent and feed myself and basically support my drumming habit, which was great. But, coming up, but I was unceremoniously fired from my serving job at age 27. And that's where I realized, like, am I going to be doing this forever, where I am just serving and I'm just learning how to play the drums? And will that be the life that I want in 10 years? And I think in my 20s, I was not very future minded. I was not thinking about where I would be in 5 years, where I would be in 10 years, or not realizing that what I do now is going to affect what I can do in 5 or 10 years. And that's the shift in the mindset that I really had to accept and embody.
I can definitely, and you even said, I liked that you mentioned how like the things that you're sort of pursuing or the things that you're doing affect like what you can do down the road. And like, that's something that I've been sort of in this perpetual state for a few years now of like, I don't necessarily know exactly what I want to be doing in 5 or 10 years. I just kind of know some things I enjoy doing. And like, it's sort of always been it started a few years ago to be like, okay, I'm going to work on X, Y, or Z for the next kind of 6 to 12 months. And I'm going to see where I am in a year from now and kind of reassess. And it kind of is now more like every month I'm kind of working at stuff and then kind of like, okay, do I still want to be going on this, or do I want to turn slightly, or do I want to go completely, off to the side? And things are just kind of like, yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about that of like, it's hard for me to have like a longer term goal just for a variety of reasons. But when I do look at what I'm doing and kind of what seems to make sense or what seems viable as a thing to kind of keep doing, yeah, it's a lot to think about. And, that's part of why I like doing this show as well, because I kind of get to learn from others and maybe get some ideas or some like something that a guest might say might spur an idea for me or might spur an idea for one of the audience. And I think that's just kind of a little bonus of it. But with that all said, the next question here. So this one, we're kind of, this is kind of the middle section of the show here. What is, so sorry, there's a preface for this and I almost forgot it because I'm a little rusty at this. So there's this idea with self-care that I think is getting more and more kind of normalized. But the original idea is like that self-care is like really pampering yourself, like going to a spa or having a really fancy dinner or something like that, or buying like a really expensive thing for yourself. But self-care can be very simple, small acts. And I know through this pandemic, I think a lot of us have had to find more of those like little ways to kind of do self-care. But so what is one of the last things that you did for self-care, no matter how small it was?
This is the easiest question to answer is I cuddle with my dog. And I know that there's some video watchers here. So there she is right there. That's Dolly. And ever since the pandemic started, I've been fortunate enough to be able to work from home. And working from home is fantastic. I love it the most. And I don't know why we ever commuted anywhere at any time. I don't understand it. It was the big lie that everyone bought into for generations upon generations. But ever since the internet, it's like, it's just a lie that we've all accepted as a truth. And the pandemic has kind of shifted that. And if we didn't spend billions upon billions, we talked about this before. If we didn't spend billions on roadways, we could have spent billions on internet infrastructure, and it would have saved everybody so much headache. Anyway, I love working from home. And one of the things I do every day now that I work from home is at lunchtime, I take an hour and we myself and my partner, we eat lunch together and we just sit on the couch and we cuddle with the dog. And that's my middle of day. That's my midday break, and then I do the exact same thing as soon as I'm done work around 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, whenever. And I go and eat dinner with them and we sit on the couch and we cuddle, and our life is literally just cuddling each other, and it's the best. And it happens every day, and I'm the luckiest person in the world to be able to have that. So that's my self-care.
Well, congratulations. That does sound lovely. So the next question here, because this show is largely about learning as well, and the different things that we learn through our journeys. So I like to ask my guests, what is the last new thing that you learned, whether it was a skill or a piece of information, and what is something you would still like to learn?
Well, I think the last thing I learned in earnest, I learned how to knit. So I've recently taken up knitting, or at least 4 years ago, I got my first set of knitting needles. And then this past winter, I've actually committed to using them in an effective way. So right now I can only really do scarves, but they turned out really well. And I've made a number of scarves for a number of friends and family. In terms of what I want to learn, the sky's the limit. Like I want to learn anything I can. But honestly, the thing that I have my sights set on is because we just purchased a property that we'll be moving into later this summer, and it has quite a large backyard and front yard. And I want to do topiary. I want to shape plants and hedges into weird and interesting shapes, but I just want to make topiary. Start off with simple shapes, like geometric shapes and whatever, and then just really get nuts with it. Let's see how crazy I can get with my garden and my hedges and things of that sort. So I guess gardening is my next big project to tackle, and I'm definitely at that age where I'm excited about gardening. So.
Yeah, I think gardening is something that a few people got a little bit more into with the pandemic. And being kind of stuck home more, and even some of my friends who have apartments with a balcony, and some of them have just started to, raise a few plants or some, tomato plants or something on their balcony, and that's one of the, I guess, positive things that's come out of all of this. So the next question here. What I'd like to ask about, again, these kind of metaphorical hats, and when we get into these situations where we do have this variety of things that we do or that we're interested in, inevitably we might have two interests or two skills or something that to maybe other people seem very diametrically opposed or unrelated. So I'd like to ask, what would you say are your two most dissimilar hats, and hats being skills or interests?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer, mostly because I feel like all my interests are really sort of interconnected. But like I'm really into knitting, and I'm really into drumming. The common thread is that literally the thread, I guess, but the commonality there is that it's using sticks, right? And sticks with your hands, and so the idea of manipulating tools to create something is really interesting to me. Same thing, I guess that's why I like topiary and gardening. It's like the ability to just sort of use your hands to then channel, energy or creativity out into the world through a medium. With drums, it's music, or knitting is with thread or with yarn, and then with gardening, it's literally like the earth and plants and such. So they might seem disparate, but I think they have a very, like, the root there, the commonality is very very fundamental, which is just the use of my hands to affect the world around me. I'm trying to think of, like, otherwise, like, I'm really into like space and astronomy and cosmology, and like this sort of like quantum particle physics sort of universe. But I'm also into like movie craft. I really nerd out on like film blogs and like the making of things. But that all ties into my interest in production, right? It's all about how do you create an environment or a space or an experience, and how they do that in film, or how they do that in staging a large concert, or how you do it with just sort of like architecture or interior design. Those are all, they're still connected, and they seem very disparate, and they seem like sort of scattered, but I think it comes from me in general just being a big picture thinker, and being able to see the connections within things that seem on the surface dissimilar or opposed, or not really related. I'm usually looking for those connections in general.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I can definitely relate to a lot of what you just said, and I also, part of the reason behind this question is that it comes back to this idea that, like, I've talked to some people who do focus mainly in kind of one area, but through doing this show and asking these questions, I often find that, you might think like, oh, a doctor. I haven't actually interviewed a doctor yet, but like a doctor, you'd think they obviously they work a lot, and they don't have a lot of free time for kind of hobbies and things. But then if you talk to a doctor, you might find out that they like to play ping pong or something. Be like, that's not something I might expect a doctor to do, but this is, maybe here's a doctor that does it. And so I find that interesting. It's almost like, what are the hidden things behind, again, that facade of, like, when people look at you or they hear your job title or your kind of main interest, and then, like, what's a surprising thing that's also part of that, that's just not readily kind of visible? And that's sort of what I guess I'm getting at with that question a little bit. This next question here is a bit of a similar kind of thing, because when we're going through like elementary school and high school, there's obviously all these like compulsory classes, like you have to study math, science, English, geography, stuff like that. And it's sort of this idea that, like, these are all crucial like life skills, things that we'll need to like work and to get along in life, but a lot of times we don't actually end up using much of some of those, depending on what we end up doing. So I think it's interesting that once we get out into the workforce, or even if we're like more of a freelancer, independent or whatever, but we always end up picking up some kind of skill or like knowledge set that we can apply in perhaps unexpected ways or in like unique ways. And so I like to ask, can you think of an example of a time that you applied a skill or like a specific kind of knowledge in a way that like it wasn't really related to or meant for?
So this is like a really, really tough question. It's really hard to sort of imagine a specific instance, but I am the kind of person that's very good at sort of jury rigging something, or jerry rigging something. I don't know what the actual term is. I don't think it's jury. I don't know. But like just sort of hobbling together a solution from disparate parts. And I think an example of this would be we previously had a dog named Charlotte who suffered from epilepsy. And in treating her epilepsy, we had to administer medication, a number of different medications on a number of different schedules. So there's a medication that she's on, it's every 24 hours, another one that's every 12 hours, another one that's every 8 hours. And managing her medication schedule was difficult, especially when I worked and also my wife and my partner worked. And one way that I sort of was able to solve this was I got an automatic pet feeder, and I put her dose in each, and it's like basically it's a rotating cup system, kind of like a 5 disc CD changer, where just like one sort of cup is exposed at any given time, and it rotates on a schedule. So I would fill the appropriate cups based on the timer, with her pills and like with treats or something to mash it all up into something that she wanted to eat. And so I set the timer at the appropriate times, but then we also had to make sure that she took it. So I found an old cell phone that we had, and it wasn't hooked up to anything, but it still had Wi-Fi. So I was able to use the camera and hook it up to like a webcam app, like a cloud-based webcam app. And I put it, and I aimed it at the pet feeder that had her medication. And then the other thing is that this dog was extremely sleepy all the time. So she wouldn't just naturally wake up if the pet feeder exposed food for her. So I also had to set an alarm on the cell phone and had it on a full blast. And then one of the favorite things that people in my office loved doing is when it was time for Charlotte to take her meds, they would all crowd around my computer and wait for the feed to show up. And then the alarm would go off. And then the happiest thing, or like the most satisfying thing, is to see Charlotte like jump into frame and eat her medication. And I'm just like, yes, one more day where she's like, she got her meds on time and she did that. And it's sort of like this overarching skill that I have of just sort of making something work with what I have, like taking advantage of what is available to me and sort of creating something that will get the job done. And that's, it serves me well, since a lot of my work is in field. And as much as we try to plan for every contingency that might arise, you're always surprised by something. And you have to make do with what you got because you don't have the time to go back to the drawing board and replan something. So I think that, like, to ask, like, when is an example of a time that I've applied a skill, I think I'm always doing that, where I'm just like taking something and making it work without having the proper tools. And I think that's probably my best skill of my resourcefulness that comes through.
You just reminded me of something that I've heard before that sounds very in line with that story you just told. And it's this idea that like a lot of the like innovation and like efficiencies that turn up in people's jobs usually are a result of either the employee being like, this particular task is too hard or too like time intensive, and I don't want it to be. So they like, instead of them going out of their way to be like, how can I be as efficient at my job as possible for my boss's sake and the company's profit's sake, it's like, no, I'm tired or I'm frustrated by this. I want to make my life easier. So what can I do to accomplish that? And so a lot of, apparently, like, I've heard stories of, especially programmers seem to be quite adept at this, at like creating like bots or creating scripts or routines that just like do things for them. So, and like, so I was just thinking as you were telling that story, like, oh, I would have just tried to, do the schedule thing, but then like your idea, your solution is pretty ingenious, and it takes a lot of load. Like, it maybe is a lot to set up, but then it takes a lot of load off of you. And that's really cool. And I think that, like, that's kind of the thing, like, necessity kind of does tend to breed like innovation and kind of new ideas like that. So thank you for sharing that story.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, so the next thing that we're going to get into, we're going to get a little bit more serious for a little bit here. So this next question has to do with close relationships, because obviously close relationships can certainly have an impact on our life and our trajectory and how quickly or slowly we might accomplish things or figure things out or get places. So I like to ask, and I'm using the sort of hat type metaphors. And so I've come up with these concepts of a hype hat and a heavy hat. And so a hype hat is a person who like hypes you up and encourages you and always tries to like kind of make you a better person and kind of help you shine. And heavy hats are more the opposite, where they're people that kind of discourage you and kind of slow you down and kind of take away from your confidence or make you doubt yourself. And you don't have to name specific people because sometimes that can be hard, but just in general, if you can think of kind of an example of each that you have kind of experienced in your life.
Yeah, like honestly, my wife is my everlasting hype hat. and she has been from the moment we met. She's just like incredibly supportive, incredibly validating, and always encouraging me to pursue things. If I ever have a wacky idea, she is the first one to like enthusiastically get up and stand up and applaud me for it. And I often have wacky ideas. It's just like part and parcel of who I am. So it's just it's been fantastic to have her in my life. Just if anything, for that reason, where if I get a crazy or wacky idea or just like something, she's like, if it makes me happy, her eyes light up, and she encourages me to pursue it and do it. And it's a really fantastic feeling to have that kind of support in my corner, that type of validation. In terms of heavy hat, like I'm not scared to say that. Honestly, my father in my life has been that. And the older I get, the more I try to empathize and realize that he's doing it from a place of fear, because a lot of he went through a lot of hardship in order to get us here. Bangladesh went through a liberation war, which tore the country apart in the 70s, which led to, which was the motivation for a lot of migration of Bengali people into North America in the late 70s and the early 80s, which my parents were a part of that. And so a life based on that kind of trauma and insecurity. And wanting to make sure that, they struggled and they sacrificed a lot in order to bring this generation up, my generation up, with the privileges that we have and the opportunities that we have. And it's very concerning if we start pursuing things like creative fields or don't pursue, professional designations like doctor, lawyer, engineer, things of that sort, because they just see it as a vehicle for stability and security and a life of comfort. And they came from a life that was very uncomfortable. There's I can understand where that comes from, but also it doesn't negate the fact that he often is the person to call into question what the intentions are or what my motivations are. And eventually it just comes down to second guessing me, to not quite give me the credit of a person who, has a head on their shoulders and can make sound decisions, even if they seem completely irrational, or if they seem crazy or out of the ordinary. That's just me. Like, I'm not an ordinary person. And so there's a lot of sort of trying to discredit or make me second guess the decisions that I'm making, which is a habit that I'm trying to snap them out of. But I empathize where it comes from, but it still doesn't make it okay. Like, I'm not here to stand for that or anything. So that's the type of struggle we have in our relationship.
Yeah, I can somewhat relate to that. My sort of parents have been kind of, one of them was a hype hat, one of them was more of a heavy hat. So thank you for sharing that. And again, I've said this on previous episodes, but just for anyone who might be new listening, that question is kind of designed to illustrate two things, like what a kind of healthy, supportive person in your life looks like, so that you can hopefully identify them and have more of them around, and obviously then to also identify what an unhealthy, unsupportive person looks or sounds or feels like, and then try either set boundaries with them or perhaps get them completely out of your life, or just generally being able to understand and recognize those kind of two things can make a huge difference in your life. Because some people unfortunately do have, they're surrounded by hype hats perhaps, and other people are surrounded by heavy hats, and those two can go very, very differently. So kind of moving forward from that, this next question, the pandemic has obviously, I think, affected most people's mental health in some way. I think we've all kind of taken at least a step back. But in whatever you're comfortable talking about, not just within the pandemic, but just in your life in general, whatever you're comfortable talking about, are there any mental health issues or struggles that you have dealt with, and how have you worked through them?
Sure. And honestly, I first want to acknowledge that I feel extremely lucky and privileged to have experienced the pandemic in the way that I have, where I was able to keep my job, and I had a very stable sort of career. And at the early part of the pandemic, it wasn't wasn't immediately stable, but it ended up stabilizing itself. But in terms of how it affected me, like definitely there was you feel loss, feeling and feel the loss of the previous life or the life that we used to have. And I definitely miss my friends, and I miss making music, and making music with my band is really the thing that I miss the most out of my pre-pandemic life, and that and hugging somebody other than my wife. And I would love to get that sort of touch and physical affection back. But I did notice this past winter, like the first sort of like between November and February, that I started feeling like seasonal affective disorder very, very heavily. And I was not ever a fan of winter. Like I already know that I have a body built for the tropics. Like I am made for sun and heat. And so every winter I'm a little bit sad and like just like not into it, and not having a good time. But this winter, I remember it was like getting out of bed was difficult. Like it was really difficult. And I would have some intrusive thoughts about like, why do I even bother? Like, why would I, like, what's the point of me waking up today and doing these things and going about my daily business? Like, I did feel that, I think for the first time on like a regular basis, like feeling intrusive thoughts come in. And it's amazing how quickly that lifted once the time change happened. You know, like we sprung forward, and all of a sudden, like there's more light in the day, and it reduced itself a great deal. And that was a pretty dramatic shift. And I'm like, wow, that is like like if I were to, I probably should have talked to somebody about it. Like I probably should have sought some help during the winter months when it was at its worst, because it was something, I don't know if it really affected, it probably did, but like, you know, I wasn't consciously letting it affect other aspects of my life or my relationships. But I do remember feeling very sort of nihilistic about things at that time. And I would say like, yeah, that was very noticeable for me.
I'm not built for the tropics, but otherwise I completely agree with you. Winter is my least favorite season by far, and I always struggle in winter, and this winter was definitely harder than usual. And yeah, I unfortunately ended up having a breakup right at the end of winter. So that is, I'll just admit it. That is a big part of why this show ended up being on a 2-month hiatus.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm glad I'm doing a lot better now, and I'm kind of getting back to things. So yeah. So the next question here. Failure, the preface is failure can be a good thing, obviously, if you can learn from failures or learn from things not going quite the way that you wanted. And so I like to ask my guests, what is an example of a time that you failed at something, or something didn't go the way that you hoped it would, but you learned a valuable lesson from that experience, and what was it?
Well, yeah, I'm trying to think, and I feel like I fail all the time. So I feel like it's a regular basis thing. So it's hard to pinpoint, but there are a couple of instances. So I have been fired from 2 jobs. I was unceremoniously fired from one of my serving jobs, which really pulled the rug out from under me. And that was when I was like, kind of like, I used to call it my drumming monk phase, where I was like practicing 8 to 10 hours a day. I was getting good at my craft, and I was really ramping up to becoming a professional drummer. But I needed my serving job to pay the bills. And when that was taken away from me, or when I got fired, it was because I made I thought it was an innocent joke about a menu item, about it not being very good. And the table that I was serving at the time, I didn't realize that they were actually senior managers from our head office, and they didn't think my joke was very funny. They laughed at the time, but 2 days later, they sent an email to our store manager and said that you got to fire this kid. So there was that. And it's funny because the lesson that I learned from that is a lesson that I quickly forgot, which is keep your mouth shut, Po. Because I have, what do I have? I have strong opinions, and I have an articulate vocabulary. And that combination can be very dangerous, especially if I'm feeling loose and unabashed, and I'm expressing my opinions like out in the world and just yelling them or throwing them at people unsolicited. So it did caution me and make me realize that I need to temper the way that I express myself in certain situations, because it's not always to my benefit to just assume this, like, and part of it is arrogance, right? It's just like assuming a tone of arrogance where like I can, just because I'm framing it in a humorous way, I have a way of of asserting myself a little too strongly, and that can put people off, and to my detriment, not just like maybe hurt people's feelings or make them feel like they don't take up space that they need to take up, but also in a way that can actually come back and really, really negatively affect me. So that was a hard lesson that I'd take. It was a lesson in humility, and so I'm happy that it happened. And there was the other time that I got fired. Well, actually, it was a layoff, and this happens in advertising agencies on a fairly regular basis, where an agency will sort of just like mass cull their staff, right? And it's a way of sort of shaking things up, or just sort of creating. It's kind of like literally like armies used to like the term decimation came from an old army tactic where they would cut off the head of every 10th person in a row. And it was a way of shaking up the infantry to get them back in line. If they become disorderly or they become sort of unruly, they stop following orders or whatever. It's a way of reorganizing them. It's a very, very brutal tactic, but it works, right? It's shock and awe. And this happens in the professional world and definitely in agencies on a fairly regular basis, where they will just like, things aren't working. Like maybe the teams aren't working well, or they aren't producing like they used to, and they will just lay people off. They're like, we're just going to get rid of in my instance, it was 5 people were let go in one day. Sometimes it's 10 or whatever, and they'll just let people go, and it just creates. It's kind of like a forest fire burn or a controlled burn, where it just creates room for people to then reorganize and grow and whatever. But I was involved in one of those. But it wasn't necessarily for the worst, because I remember when I was laid off from that agency, I actually felt a sense of relief because I was not doing well there. The agency was a fantastic place to work. It had a lot of perks. It had everything that you think of like working in an ad agency. All the fun things were there, like foosball tables and beer fridges, and there's a lot of dogs that were running around. But at the same time, I just wasn't. I was in a department that I'm going to say was rather toxic. It was run by some really brutally awful personalities, people who were not there to nourish or nurture people. They weren't team players. Like they were just really, they were rude. They were insular. They were insecure. They were toxic people. And I was working directly with them, and I was not having a great time. And for 2 years, I'm like, I'm getting paid relatively well, and I have all these workplace perks, but I am not my career is not going anywhere. I'm not being utilized or developed at all. And it was a really not a great situation for me. So the day that I was laid off, I was like, this is actually better. And I was able to, take that time. I was given a fairly generous severance package. So I actually had a really nice, I was laid off in like the end of May. I think it was like the end or middle of May, and I had 3 months of severance. So I just like full salary for 3 months without any real obligation. It was actually a pretty fun time for me, and I was able to regroup and reorganize, and eventually I landed in the position that I am now. And I've been with that company for 6 years, run with much more healthy, constructive people with stronger leadership, and it actually makes a huge difference in one's career development. So those are 2 instances, I think, of like what people will consider failures, of losing a job or being fired from a workplace. But one thing that really got me was after I was fired from my serving job, for instance, and this is when I didn't know if I had any other type of employable skills, where I had basically dedicated my life to playing the drums and waiting tables. And I was fired from the serving job, and I was really, really down on myself. I felt like I had been kicked in the stomach. And I called my mom, and I told her, I'm like, I just got fired. She's like, okay, you probably feel really, really bad right now. I'm like, yes, I do. She's like, but you have to remember that you're in this country, you were brought up in this country, you speak the language, and you have been and you are smart and you're capable. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, so don't worry, you're going to be okay. And that kind of stuck with me. It's like, even just to remember what my privileges were, at a time where I felt like I didn't have any. She's like, you grew up here, you were educated here, and you speak the language. And she would tell me about, she didn't have that benefit. She grew up in a different country for 30 some odd years of her life. She was educated there. And when she came over here, she told me about how she had to handwrite job applications with like an ink and pen. She's like, you have a computer, you have the internet, you have all of this going for you. So just remember, you're going to be okay. It just like be sad today, but tomorrow, just know that, you have to get back to being okay.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I actually remember myself growing up here in Canada. I remember filling out job applications in pen and ink when I was 16, applying for my first jobs. That's kind of I hadn't thought about that in a long time. But yeah, I just wanted to really briefly tell a quick story of my own from kind of the one that you said about getting fired from bad jobs or jobs that aren't a good fit. And that kind of falls under that sort of, sometimes you find out when things don't go the way that you, or, something like that, that you find, oh, that wasn't right for me anyways. And I was in a job about 11, 12 years ago, and I wasn't happy there because when I started, it was one of those things where it was a very small company, and it's just, okay, what position or what thing do we need the next person that we hire to learn? And I started there and like, okay, we need someone to learn shipping. And so, Lacey, you're learning shipping. And that's not what I had applied for. And I had never done it before. And just like, well, that's what I got to learn. That's what I got to do. And then I was stuck there for a year. And then I got cut just after Christmas, kind of like you, I think, said about one that was for, budget reasons. And I was actually like literally as soon as the owner told me, and I like stepped outside to start walking back to the bus stop, I called my mom while I was walking back to the bus stop, and it's just like, I'm free. And like, yes, I knew that I didn't know what was going to be next, but that actually ended up being the start of when I transitioned from, like, I had been trying to pursue some kind of career in like music or some kind of creative field then, and it's like, hey, this just seems way too precarious. I need something like that I can rely on. So that was the opportunity for me to switch tracks, and I've been kind of on that other track since. So yeah, that's that kind of just what that reminded me of, and I like to kind of share those stories sometimes when it's relevant.
Yeah, it's something I say that sometimes it takes huge upheaval to get you out of a rut. When ruts are deep, sometimes you don't know how you're going to get yourself out, or you don't even know that you're in the rut. And then a huge upheaval will blast you out of that rut, and then all of a sudden you're on a different path.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why I say, like, sometimes it can be a good thing, and you don't know it at that exact moment. But so on this show, through answering all these different questions, a lot of times advice just naturally kind of comes up through like kind of insights and answers. But I like to kind of round us out with trying to distill that. And so I like to ask the guest to give advice to the listeners. And there's 3 different groups that we're going to address, and you can give either the same advice to all 3 groups, or you can give separate advice to each group. So I like to ask, what advice would you give to a teenager? What advice would you give to a 30-something? And what advice would you give to a grandparent?
To a teenager, I would say stick with French. Stay with French and learn your French. Because that is like my biggest regret in education. Like, I studied Bachelor of Fine Arts, and I wish I had stuck with French. That's like the number one thing. And I tell that to anytime we have like a bring your kid to work day or a career day or whatever. If there's like a 12-year-old that comes by my desk, I'm like, stick with French. I tell them all the time. To a 30-year-old, what would I say? I would say, imagine the life you want at 40 and plan for that now. And I would ask them, it's like, do you want to be where you are at age 40? Because that's the question that I feel that I didn't ask myself soon enough. That's the question that I wish I had sort of asked, or realized that, I was very much a live for the moment type of person. In the analogy or the fable of the grasshopper and the ant, I was very much a grasshopper. But now I'm somebody who like sets goals and works to achieve them. And it's something that if it was a habit that I formed earlier, I would have had a few more goals achieved under my belt at this time. It's never too late, but it's never too early to adopt a goal-oriented mindset. And that doesn't mean that you're a nerd or that you're square, or, you don't know how to live in the moment or appreciate, the frivolity of life or be spontaneous. Like you can do all that, but you can also set goals and set a plan to achieve those goals. And that kind of habit is something that, even though I think it's something that's been told to me my entire adult life since I was like in university or high school, it's not something that's sunk in until what I feel is a little bit late, but it's not too late. So I would say it's never too early, but it's never too late to adopt a goal-oriented mindset. In terms of like the last one, the bit of advice for somebody who's old, am I giving this advice as if I was my age and they are as old as they are?
Yeah.
I would say, A, shut up and enjoy your golden years, and B, give out your inheritance early. Don't wait till you die. Just give up the money. That's what I'm going to say for old people.
That's fair, and that's I think those are both first piece. Like I've gotten a lot of like the same kind of answers from a lot of guests, but that was a very unique answer. So thank you for that. So yeah, this is the part of the show where I flip the script really briefly and I give the guest an opportunity to ask me a question. A lot of guests have asked me about, why I started the show or what I hope to achieve with it. So I've answered that one a bunch of times already. If there's something else that you would like to ask me, now is your opportunity.
What I would ask is like, I don't know how many of these you've done. I assume it's a few dozen, but I assume that there are some, like, what are the overarching common themes that you are learning from speaking to these people that wear all these multiple hats? What is like a pattern that you find that's emerging from these conversations?
It's really interesting because I thought that like my initial idea was to literally only interview people that I knew were like, had their hands in all these different things. And I've interviewed a few people who I thought were more like specialized. And through that, I found out, like I was saying, that like quite literally everybody has other things that they do that you might never guess. And I always love finding out about those because it's just this fun little surprise. And it's like I said, like, wait, that's a doctor and he plays ping pong? Like, I never would have guessed that. And that's just like, huh. And like, I've had this mixture of like, I'll get a lot of the same kinds of answers on certain questions, but then other questions get like these really interesting, unique answers a lot. And so what I've actually tried to do with the show as I've refined the question set over time, I've like certain questions, if they get like pretty much the same answer every time, I eventually will cut them because I'm like, hey, that's not adding anything to the show. And I try to like find the questions that will get like some kind of unique insight. But like literally I learn something from every guest. And like now that I'm trying to more actively get like more diversity as well. And I'm really going to try to start getting like actual more like grandparents and teenagers on the show because I want to interview them as well. I don't want it to always just be people in the 30 to 40 range, which it mostly has so far. Because that's, again, it's like I'll learn more the more different like perspectives and experiences that I kind of draw from. Does that answer your question happily?
Yeah, it's getting there. Now I wish I wasn't so hard on grandparents, but because I do think it would be really interesting to have this conversation with somebody who's who's aged or in that advanced stage of life. So I think I don't want to discount. I think there's a lot of value to our elderly people. I do think that that there's a little too much judgment coming down from the aged years down to the, we got a lot more to deal with at this age. We're dealing with a world that they left us, and it's not great right now. We're trying to make the most of it. So I think the transfer of wealth has to happen a lot faster. And on top of that, I think they either need to vote better or not vote at all. That's what I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, another quick little thing that I'll sort of say on that for anyone who's listening. I put up a short video recently on YouTube to kind of say like people are welcome to send in suggestions for people they would like to see on the show, but also for teenagers and grandparents, I actually am going to have like different question sets because some of these questions are not going to be as applicable to a teenager and some of them are not going to be as applicable to an elder. So it has the potential to not quite create 3 shows, but like it's, you are going to definitely be getting like kind of a unique answer set from these different kind of generations. And I'm especially like, I've had a few instances now, and I'm only in my late 30s, and I've been starting to have experiences where, like, I don't think I'm that out of touch with the youth, but
You are so out of touch.
I'm hearing things from even just like, early 20s people, and I'm just like, that's a thing now? And it's like, oh, so this is what my parents, felt like when I was growing up. You just don't realize things are changing.
Oh, it happens so fast. It's
So
like,
when I
yes.
start to hopefully interview teenagers soon, then I imagine that's going to be a bit of a culture shock, but at least I'll become a little bit more aware
Yeah,
of kind of
you'd be a
things.
little more literate in the youth culture and what they're all doing. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, with that said, this is a chance we will take. If there's any, I like to give the guests a chance to, like, if there's any charities or causes that you would like to promote or raise awareness of.
Yeah, absolutely. So I, all during COVID-19, I've done a sort of a data tracker focused on the Ontario sort of trajectory of the outbreak. And in that data tracker, at the end of every post, I always call out for donations for Dandelion Initiative. If you're unaware, the Dandelion Initiative is a survivor-run not-for-profit that focuses on sexual assault survivors and advocating on their behalf in terms of government and community policy, and specifically on safer spaces training. So they deliver safer spaces training to bars, venues, and any other organization that feels like they could use that type of training to make sure that they know how to spot the signs of sexual assault and create a safer space for anybody who's a potential victim of sexual assault. They do fantastic work. It's incredibly valuable. And once again, they're survivor-run organization, and it's all trauma-informed and survivor-centric. So they're a fantastic organization. And then the other one is for Maggie's Toronto, which is the sex workers project. They advocate for safe sex worker safety. And sex worker in industry safety. So they don't. What they do is they support sex workers without judgment, and it doesn't matter if it's legal or illegal or whatever you feel about that. Sex workers deserve support. They deserve respect, and they deserve legitimacy in society. They are doing legitimate work. Sex workers work, and Maggie's does fantastic work on behalf of sex workers in Canada. So those are the two charities that I would encourage everyone to find out more about and donate if they have the means.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I just want to take a quick second at the end of the video. If you're watching on YouTube, I do have like a kind of a title card screen at the end that does list a lot of the common charities that the show does support or have been brought by past guests, and I will add that to the list on the website at collecting.com. Also has that at the bottom of the page. Each episode I do, like, we often get a new unique suggestion or two or three from the guests, so I love that growing this list over time. And yeah, there are so many good causes out there that could use attention. And of course, I also want to take a quick second to say there's a dedicated button on the screen on YouTube, Black Lives Matter, and also support, as we kind of talked briefly about earlier, Indigenous rights. And that's another thing that definitely a lot of education and activism needs to happen with. So those are kind of from this side of things. And so now we will kind of start wrapping up here. That's the plug section. So anything now that whether it's like social media accounts or websites or projects, anything kind of online or in the world that you do or are involved with that you want people to know about?
Sure. So shamelessly, I play in a band. We're called the Barons. It's a very sort of folk rock, alt country. But our lead singer and songwriter writes fantastic songs. So if you're into that sort of like lap steel influenced country-ish rock, we're a good band, and I stand by the music that we make. So check them out, Anywhere online, it's lebaronsband.com, Facebook/lebaronsband, Instagram, etc. But LeBarons, like the car. And otherwise, I created a face mask called the Sippo mask. It is a mask that lets you use a straw without taking off or touching the mask. I know that COVID is sort of winding down, but if you ever need to travel, or if you need to commute and you don't quite want to let go of your masks quite yet, the Sippo mask is something that can really make your commute or your travel much more comfortable. It allows you to have a drink without removing your mask or having to take it off. It uses a self-sealing valve that only opens to accept the straw, and when the straw is removed, it seals up again. So it works just like any regular face mask, except it does this one thing where it accepts a straw and seals up when it's not there. So Sippo, Sippo, sippomask.com. Look it up, and it might suit you. It might do really well for you.
Yeah, I will put a little picture of that up on the screen as well. I watched the video, and it's like, that is a genius idea, and I'm glad that somebody thought of it.
I appreciate it. It's very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, and so for me, I'll try to keep this really short. You may already know, this to the audience, you may already know I do wear a lot of hats. I do a lot of different things. You can find this show online, hatcollecting.com, hat collecting on social media. My website is artemiscreates.com, which is where you can go to find out about all the things that I either have done or am currently doing. And I will put up a brief little overlay on the screen as well, because I'm on so many different websites and platforms. It's kind of ridiculous. And yeah, at the very end of the video as well, I'll just quickly say, like, I have music, I have a book, I have designs and merchandise and things. So there's just some things to check out besides the show. So that is pretty much that. The thing I'll take here, I'm just checking my notes, make sure I don't miss anything. So what I like to do to ask for like audience kind of participation, engagement is if you are watching on YouTube, or even if you're listening to the podcast, if you go to YouTube and just leave a comment, whether you want to say the most interesting thing that you learned in this episode, or if you have any questions, or if you just want to leave a comment, just come by and say hello and leave a thought, and that will be greatly appreciated. And yeah, if you come to my YouTube channel, you will find lots of other stuff, because I've been doing different things lately. But yeah, so that is that. But yeah, so this brings us to the traditional hat sign off, as I like to call it, and this is the part where we both put on a hat to kind of close out the show here.
Oh, I didn't bring a hat. Hold on.
Oh dear.
Wait, I got one.
I almost forgot myself. So.
Okay.
So do you want to do them at the same time, or do you want to do them? You just go ahead and do yours, or how do you want to? Do
you mind if I actually get a more fun hat? Like, do you mind like 2 seconds? Okay, I'm gonna get a better hat than this.
Yeah, I will have to take my headphones off to put this one on, but. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and start doing that.
Okay.
Oh, geez, sorry, I punched the microphone. It's a sparkly purple baseball hat kind of thing.
All right, well, let's see. I'll do mine.
Okay, this was not planned. This just worked out really nicely.
It's also a sparkly hat.
Yeah. I felt like going sparkly here to kind of celebrate the return of hat collecting, and now I'm glad I did, because we had this lovely little coincidence.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of things that sparkle. So
I always have this debate whether, like, sometimes, like, should I have it be a surprise, like we surprise each other with the hat, or should I actually try to coordinate it so we can have stuff like this? And I've never settled on a definitive thing, so it just kind of ends up being whatever it does to each episode.
Oh, I wish I had. I didn't. Maybe I missed the note in the show notes, but I actually have an LED hat that I can put like custom messages and shapes on.
Speaking of LED, I'm gonna see how this.
Oh, hey!
I recently got this for my Twitch streams. It doesn't look the same with the lights on, but I was curious how it would look on this show. So
I think it looks great with the lights up. You should, I would suggest you keep them up the next time you're recording. But I'm a. Yeah, that looks sharp. I like that.
It looks really cool with the main lights out. It's got this very kind of like lavender ambiance. It's great.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of anything that lights up.
Yeah, and this I'm trying to like move my head around so you can actually see the sparkliness of this. Yeah, I I'm always so happy when this sort of thing, like, because this show is like, I don't want the show to be too serious, but I didn't want it to be that we're wearing hats the entire time because I thought that would become kind of gimmicky. So doing it just for like a minute at the end feels like a fitting way to kind of wrap things up. And yeah, so now I guess I'll have to do the actual outro now, which I often stumble through. Again, it's been like a couple of months. I'm a little bit rusty still, but thank you so much for watching and listening to another episode of Hat Collecting. I hope that you did learn something, and I hope that you will like and subscribe if you're able. And yeah, so until next time, stay curious and keep collecting those hats.